Hey, Juan here. Today we are going to talk about what are the tools that I'm using on my day job as a product person. So as product people, you tend to use a lot of different tools for doing your work. And this can be many different tools for different purposes, for project tracking, for backtracking, for documentation, for communication. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the tools that I'm using on my daily job. Why do I use them, or what do I like about those tools? And also what I might not like so much about those tools. So it's very important as a product manager to have a kind of a well-structured way of working. And this also applies to the tools and when you are using the different tools that you are using. So you're not just randomly using different tools depending on the occasion and depending on what you are doing just because, but just somehow that it helps you also keep the structure of your ways of working. And this is why it's important to have a very potentially well-defined ways of working and which tools are you using for which purpose. So first of all, one tool that I'm using is a wiki. In this case, it's Atlassian's Confluence. Why using this tool is it is quite good to organize and sort out projects, sort out documentation, meeting notes, and understand, for example, in a project, where is all the information that is going to be needed to work on that project. It helps hand over processes, internal communication, and updating of the information into just one source and everybody working in the same tool at the same time. Where are the cases that I'm using this tool? So it can be many different cases. It can be just for documentation of a project, what the project is trying to achieve. So typically if I try to do like a business case or some kind of pitch deck to explain what is the value of a new idea or of a new product, I try to do it within Confluence. And there I have a template for describing what is this business case, what is the value proposition, how is the go-to-market going to work. And always try to continue and use the same format because it's easier always to exchange the information and people know what to expect when they are working within a project and where to find the different information. We also use it a lot for documentation of the project. So whenever we have meetings with different stakeholders, we try to keep meeting notes and add them into Confluence Wiki. This way it's easier to follow up the meeting notes, what was agreed, what wasn't agreed, and potential action points there. Another way that I use Confluence Wiki is to actually do an early planning and early phasing of projects to understand a little bit how do we see that this is going to be evolving on the future. And this is not a detailed roadmap, but it's more like a high-level goals that, okay, I understand that what is the vision for a product, but how can we achieve this vision? What are the milestones that we should be taking? So define what is your MVP or understand what will be kind of the scope of the MVP and what are the upcoming phases after that. And this doesn't mean that you have to validate or that we had to work still with customers and understand what they want to, where they want to use the solution or the product. But it's important to have a vision and understanding what is the long-term view and what is the long-term goal of your product. And this helps me to keep the focus and understanding that what are the next goals of what we would like to be achieving. And of course, sometimes you have to go and review your goals if they are still valid once you start validating with your customers. The next tool that I'm going to talk is actually two tools that is for bug reporting and project tracking. So here I'm using nowadays GitHub and SendHub. GitHub, well, probably you all know what GitHub is. It's much more than just bug management or issue management. But we are using it a lot from the product point of view to create the new issues, the new stories that need to be addressed in the product. SendHub is an application that is built on top of GitHub and is actually built for project management. It's very good for building your roadmap and actually integrates very well with GitHub. And this is the reason why we are using it. We used to use Jira, but then when we moved to GitHub and Git, then of course Jira doesn't work quite well. So it was logical to look for a replacement for Jira. In this case, actually, SendHub is a really good tool. And it actually has a lot of functionality that you will look for in a project management tool. That you can build your roadmap, you can build your milestones, you can set your milestones. You can also see different type of reports, like burn down charts, and so on, that it gives you a very good understanding of where are you in the project and how it's actually progressing. So from the product point of view, when you are in the execution phase, it's a very, very nice tool to have a very high level overview of what is going on instead of having to go into the very granular detail that typically GitHub has. And actually, I'm not that often using GitHub. I'm typically just using Zenhub because issues reflected or issues that are within GitHub, they can be reflected or linked within Zenhub. And it gives a very nice overview of what is the project and where is it going. Another tool that I'm using nowadays for whiteboarding, it's Miro. Miro is actually a very nice tool when it comes to whiteboarding. Of course, there is Microsoft Whiteboard. I'm not completely sure what is the name, but probably it's the same as Whiteboard, which is okay tool. But Miro offers a very nice functionality, very nice templates, also like a presentation mode, linking to certain parts of the board. So it makes it actually very nice and easy to navigate and share information with other people. So you can use it just as a normal whiteboard where you can just sketch up ideas or work in a common workspace and just collaborate with others. But it's also very good when it comes to actually define workflows, document those workflows, potentially also creating some kind of a sketch of how some tools are going to work and what is the customer journey going to be. And we use it also a lot for different type of workshops. So whenever we have a retro, sprint date retro or planning, it can be very useful to use the whiteboard to everybody work at the same time in the same space and actually throw the ideas and then try to bundle them together and try to figure out what are our common goals, for example, out of a retro. And yes, of course, nowadays, during these times that we are living, working from home, working remotely with people all over the place, it is actually a very nice solution to be working with. So if you haven't been looking into it, I would actually highly recommend it. Another tool that I have been using, and I have to be honestly saying that I'm not using this tool that much nowadays, is a tool for sketching, which is called nowadays diagrams.net. It used to be called draw.io. And it's actually a good tool, or it's an okay tool when it comes to actually sketch UIs and see how you could actually be prototyping some kind of UX for your users and actually get some feedback from those users early on the process when you are actually building the ideas, when you are starting to think about your prototypes and how this could work and create some kind of UI mockup. This is actually quite okay for these kind of workflows. Bear in mind, I'm not a product designer. I know that there's way better tools like Figma or InVision when it comes to user experience. But for me, just being a product person that sometimes wants to do some very basic SketchUps, mockups, or very basic concepts, it is an okay tool for doing this job. Then for communication purposes, nowadays one of the tools that I've been using the most is Slack, probably like everybody else, and then also Microsoft Teams. There's reasons why using both of them. Slack is something that engineers really love to use, and it also allows the usage of bots that it's very handy when it comes to development and being able to get automated alerts. And Teams we use typically more with the rest of the organization, especially for online meetings. At least from my experience, Slack tends to change sometimes a little bit the defaults on the audio settings, which is kind of annoying that you always have to try to figure out what are the audio settings when you're starting the call, which is kind of strange. But then Microsoft Teams tends to work a little more reliable in that side. And it usually is the one that we also use for external meetings, because of course whenever you're using Outlook, Microsoft Outlook, you create a new meeting, you can add just the link to the call directly into the meeting without having to install any kind of extension. So this kind of makes your life easy. So that's kind of the de facto one for external communications there. Other tools that I'm using almost daily is SharePoint, the Microsoft Office, so different tools, especially Excel, PowerPoint, to a certain degree Word, but rarely Word. Typically, I'm using Wiki for the purposes that I used to use Word. OneDrive, Power BI, for example, those are tools that I'm using almost daily as well. SharePoint is the place that typically I'm using for storing information, because it's the one that we use within the company. Makes it easier just obviously to use whatever everybody else is using for online storage or file repository. But in all honesty, I actually like more how OneDrive works. So it's kind of a, sometimes I've been using OneDrive because it's also linked to the same account. So, but that's not very consistent, so it doesn't help a lot. But the way of working, I like more how OneDrive works actually than how SharePoint does. Obviously, probably as a product manager, you have to do presentations. Doing presentations from a wiki, I have tried it and it just rarely works. People tend to start reading whatever is in the wiki. It's very difficult then to present, and it's very difficult to keep people's attention because they just focus on whatever is shown in the screen instead of paying attention to what you are trying to talk. So from that point of view, actually PowerPoint is still a much better tool because it helps you actually keep the people's focus on one topic at a time instead of just moving forward and just people actually trying to read while they are trying to listen. And usually when they are trying to do both, they do wrong. So from that point of view, I rather use PowerPoint still for presentations. And obviously we all had to do presentations for outsiders, stakeholders, and then in that case, obviously PowerPoint or any presentation tool, it's a much more friendly way to do it. And also Power BI, Excel, many times I use those ones for reporting, doing quick visualizations on the data that we have available. I also use, okay, not related to the same one, but on the other tools, I'm also using my SQL workbench to actually run some quick queries on some of our databases to understand, for example, so how much people are using a product, or how often have they been downloading the latest version that we have available, have they run it, have they used it, what are the features that they are using. So I'm also trying to sometimes do those very quick queries myself instead of always be poking the data scientists to try to get the information that I need. And then of course Power BI usually is more for the typical dashboards that I like to track. So what is the performance of the software? What are the main features that people are using? How are they integrating to other tools? How many active users do we have? So all these more typical metrics that you would be actually looking into a dedicated dashboard. And of course, there is always the good old email and phone for communication purposes. I have to admit, I'm not the most fond of sending or reading emails person that it's out there. I think that using Slack, using other ways to communicate wiki, tagging people is a much faster and easier way of working. But you have to live with the reality that there's a lot of people still working with emails and you still have to use that for communication purposes. To a certain degree, it's still working relatively well when you work outside the organization. True, we also have dedicated channels for externals within Slack or within Teams. So you can live with those things, but as you can imagine, not everybody is not very comfortable to use those channels for communication purposes. And many people are very used still to work out of what they have in their inbox, which is potentially not the best way of working either, because it's not the best way of tracking tasks, but it's something that it's still there and just, well, you have to live with it, and that's one of the means that I'm also using. And then this phone, actually, typically I rarely do phone calls nowadays, not even for personal life. I tend to use much more Slack, WhatsApp, Teams, whatever it is, the different communication methods that people are using. Of course, there's new ones coming all the time, Telegram, whatnot, and just trying to cope with all the people moving to the next one and see which one you have the most audience or the most people that you communicate with. Try to tag along with those communication methods. And finally, probably one of the tools that I'm still using, maybe not that heavily nowadays, is the good old pen and paper. It is true that pen and paper, it's difficult, it's kind of a headache because you always have to then digitalize it, put it in Wiki, put it in SendHub or in GitHub, those new issues that you somebody has reported. It's much better if you actually are in a meeting and you already have a dedicated page in Wiki that you can actually start typing your meeting notes. But not always you can afford doing that. So sometimes you still had to have the good old pen and paper that helps you getting the notes and actually then translating them into something digital that you can then keep it for the actual documentation purposes. I'm sure I'm missing a ton of tools that potentially I'm using, maybe not that regularly, but still using to a certain degree. And obviously I'm aware that for some purposes there might be better tools than some of the ones that I have been talking about. If you think for project management nowadays, ClickUp, Asana, Monday, those are really good tools that people are using in many organizations. But for one reason or another, there has been better choices from my point of view, like SendHub, even if it's kind of a very, very niche tool. But that's a brief summary of the tools that I'm using. And actually, I would like to know which ones are the tools that you are using that potentially I haven't mentioned here. I'm always interested to find out which ones are the best solutions for the different problems that we have. So again, if there is somebody that is a good product manager that can actually tell me better solutions for the problems I have when it comes to documentation, when it comes to communication, when it comes to project management, I would love to hear your thoughts and see what are the tools and products that you are working with. And please share them in the links below. And if there is some part or some main area that I have missed completely, of course, please let me know as well. If you like this kind of content, I produce this kind of videos every week. So I would love if you can like and subscribe because it helps a lot the channel. I will see you next week, and remember to stay safe.